host, Asta.
And I'm your host, Saika.
Yeah, and today is a very special day. It is our episode 4, and we have a very, very special guest here with us today, Emily Davies.
For the past 8 years, she has worked as an outpatient mental health therapist, collaborating with clients to work towards creating more fulfilling and meaningful life. Her specialties include adolescents, adults, couples, and families dealing with issues pertaining to mood, anxiety, thoughts, and trauma, as well as the exploration of identity, self-esteem, and relationship issues. Welcome, Emily. We are so glad to have you on our show.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
We are so happy to have you. Oh my God, this is amazing because to have an actual therapist join us in this episode about how to have healthy conversations is so special. So before we go forward, why don't you tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself, Emily, and why you chose this profession?
Okay, so mental health is very important to me because I feel like it's really the pinnacle of health. It's just as important as physical health, if not more important, because it really determines your ability to have a fulfilling life and a fulfilling relationship with other people and a fulfilling relationship with yourself. So I always really enjoyed getting to know people and hearing their stories. And I wanted to find a way to do that in a more helpful way and learn how I could really help guide them when they did choose to share with me to a better life. So that's why I went into the profession. And it's such a gift because it's such a privilege to be able to hear people's stories and their struggles and their successes and what really matters to them. And I get to do that every day. And that's such a privilege to me.
Wow. That's amazing. And how about a little bit about yourself? Like, what does your life look like? Like, let us know about you a little bit.
So, let's see. I'm married and I have one son. He's 2 and he's just like the light of my life. He's so much fun. And I work for myself. So I do outpatient mental health therapy and I do it part-time. So I work like a little bit every day, but I don't work a full 40 hours a week because I find it impossible with everything else I have going on.
Exactly. It must be exhausting too, to like hear and share stories with people.
For sure. And then apart from my family life and my work life, I like to be outside as much as humanly possible. And I try to exercise every day to take care of myself, just emotionally. That's like my me time. That's my self-care. So I do that a little bit every day. And I'm always trying to get outside for walks. And yeah, that's a little bit
I'm
about
a big
me.
believer on self-care, big advocate on fitness and everything. So it's just good to hear that you can juggle your work, your family time, but still have time for yourself. So when you prioritize yourself, that is also part of mental health.
Absolutely.
So that is thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you got to be able to take care of your own self before you help people.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we wanted to do this episode because we want to understand how to have healthy conversations, talk about mental health a little bit, therapy a little bit, because I come from a family and society and culture where mental health and therapy and mental health issues just generally weren't talked about. So before we even get to all of this, what kind of issues do people come to therapy for?
So some people come just to have an unbiased perspective about their own life and to have a place to kind of work on themselves. So that's typically people that have grown up with therapy being very destigmatized and just kind of part of life, and they kind of enjoy it. So people may come, once a month, once every other week, just to run stuff by an unbiased perspective. It's used kind of as a container so that you can work on yourself in these small segments and then not have to kind of carry that with you. So if you were to talk to a friend about all of your deepest, most intimate things, it might be hard afterward because you would feel kind of exposed. But if you speak to a therapist, it kind of stays in that box and allows you to work on that and then come back to it when you feel able. So it's kind of a contained way to have difficult conversations about yourself. Other people come if they've been struggling with anxiety, depression. There's different types of therapy. So you can come just as an individual, or you can come as a couple or as a family. And people work on their relationships with others, their relationship with themselves. They may come with struggles with work or struggles with coping, grief. It's kind of endless options, which makes my work so interesting.
Wow. So it sounds like it's not even just people who have been through trauma and everything. It's just anything people could come to therapy for to just have clarity.
Absolutely. So you don't even have to have kind of like a diagnosis or a trauma history. Of course, like it is helpful for people that have a trauma history or have things that they're struggling with in those ways. But even if you don't, you can still come and just try to understand yourself better and try to like achieve a more meaningful life.
Wow,
that's amazing.
That is
See, that's
amazing.
one thing I hadn't thought about.
Yep, that is amazing. Because most of the time when you hear the word therapy, even till this day, when you hear the word therapy, it's like, okay, you have to be diagnosed with something. Right. You have to have something, right? But when you said it saying, let's understand ourselves, and therapy can guide you and help you to kind of lead the way and show you and live a meaningful life. Therapy can do that.
And the thing is, like, one of the reasons why this means so much to me and also for Saika is that we come from a place where therapy and mental health and conversations about mental health was just like non-existent. It wasn't even the concept doesn't even exist. It might now a little bit, but still it's not as available. And I wish I had that access to resources and, just people and just therapy in general, or even to understand myself growing up. And I didn't have that when I was younger. And, at Himalayan Hipsters, we really want to kind of like normalize therapy and mental health and reaching out for help so that people understand that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to even like have questions about yourself and go somewhere to find clarity in yourself.
Right.
So like, that's why we're here. Again, the reason why we're also doing this is to understand how to have healthy conversations.
And these healthy conversations, I would like to add, is how was your day today? That is also a conversation. A healthy conversation can be, babe, what you said to me today, that really hurt my feelings. Or what you are doing today is something that I do not agree with. Those are also part of healthy conversations. And also, like, when we come from a very conservative family, like we mentioned, and we dealing with loved ones who are very firm on their beliefs and values and set in their ways. How can you go about trying to start having conversation that challenge their beliefs? Because when as I mentioned, we are very outspoken about what we believe in. And we challenge their beliefs and culture, So how do we go about that?
So
Emily?
I think one of the most important things is preparing ahead of time. And what I mean by that is preparing yourself ahead of time. So going into these conversations, knowing ahead of time what you want to get out of that and setting a reasonable goal for that conversation. So these people that you're having these conversations with, right? And that probably completely changing their mind in one conversation is unlikely. So you want to set a reasonable goal for yourself of starting this conversation and starting this dialogue. The other thing that's important is preparing the other person. So you probably wouldn't want to spring this on a family member if it's a difficult conversation. You might want to say something to them like, I'd like to talk to you about something that might feel a little scary or different to talk about. Can we set a time to do that? And prep them that it might be 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that. Set a time limit and stick to it so that it doesn't feel threatening for you or for them. So you're kind of preparing yourself and you're preparing them that even if this is uncomfortable, it's going to be a short period of time.
Yeah.
And if one of your goals is to maintain that relationship afterward, try to do something less threatening after that period of time is over. So if you're going to talk about something very challenging for 30 minutes, maybe afterwards you get a snack together, or you take a walk, or you play a game, something that feels normal to both of you and non-threatening. So it doesn't feel like this conversation is going to go on forever. And it provides a little bit of solace for both of you that the relationship goes on if you do want it to.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. That's crazy because, when I would want to talk to my family about some things that I really like, it matters to me, and then, it's challenging to them, that's not the approach I took,
Of course.
because I didn't know how to. But that is just like taking me back. And I'm like, oh my God, I wish I would have done this better,
Yes. And I think even for me is like, when I did that, I said, okay, we need to have a conversation. But what happened was we just started, I think the clash just happened and
Yes.
we just left the room. Even though we had that conversation, we knew that we had a purpose for that meeting, but we just all left the room because everybody just got so angry and just left it. But you're saying that when we prepare ourselves, go into our mindset, be ready to receive what is going to happen because we started that conversation. So I have a follow-up question to this. So yeah, we say, hey, we want to have this conversation, and we keep saying that, hey, this is going to, this is something that's really important to us and we want to talk about it. What if we feel even we said it and we felt like we talked to a wall and there was no message received? What do we do to that? Like, there's no emotions coming in after you've said
So
that,
I think
delivered
this
that
part
message.
is most challenging. And I think typically when we think about having a conversation or setting a boundary, we think about the most challenging part being that initial conversation or just saying what your boundary is, when in reality, the most difficult part is the work afterward and the work with maintaining that boundary and continuing that conversation. So I think if the person that you're speaking to really is very set in their beliefs, this first conversation is really just a starting point. And you might have to say your piece in as respectful of a way as you can, and know that this is challenging everything that this other person stands for, and then leave it. So you might say to yourself, like, it might not be possible to change this person's beliefs. So I'm going to say what I need to say and provide the education that I can. And then I'm going to step back because some people's opinions may not be able to be shifted. And if so, then the support that you're seeking or the validation that you're seeking might be better found with others. And if you think about it, anytime someone has an opinion that is very stuck in, they're probably not going to change it in that moment. They're probably going to change it afterwards. So what you're trying to do is give them a piece of information that they can then think about later and will possibly shift their perspective at a later date on their own time. And your best bet is to not alienate that person in the moment. So you might come in kind of armed with phrases like, don't feel like you need to respond to this right away. And I understand that this is very, very challenging to hear. It's okay if you need a minute. Let's take some space and talk about this at another time, because I think there's such a human urge to kind of solve everything right away and really get to the meat of this as soon as possible. When in reality, it's really hard, especially with these very dug-in beliefs, to change those things that quickly. So you're looking at these conversations as a starting point and a place to kind of begin that journey.
Right. So when we start this conversation, you mentioned that we're planting a seed, right? We're planting a seed in their head and saying like, hey, she and so believes in this. And they might have this like shock in the beginning because it's a shock, right? So how often can you be consistent with that delivery? How do you approach or re-enter that same conversation? Because, you feel like you want to talk about that again. So how do you go about doing that?
I think what's tricky is that you don't have the power to completely change someone else's thoughts, right? You have the power to start those conversations. You have the power to educate them. You have the power to say what you need to say and educate yourself. But the other person really does have the power to determine how often they're willing to have this conversation. And you kind of need to respect that if you expect the conversations to be fruitful. Right? So if that person is consistently kind of like, I don't want to talk about this, I don't want to talk about this, I don't want to talk about this, if you force that conversation, they may be less likely to be open to changing their mind than they would be if you were kind of more gently expressing yourself and still living your life, but expressing yourself in these ways. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, it absolutely does. And because, when you come up to somebody and just like challenge their beliefs and stuff, they'll put their arms up too, right? They're going to act defensive because they feel that they're attacked. But like, the thing is, like, in the moment, when you're in the moment and there's so many emotions involved, and you feel like, you are not being treated right, it's really hard to do that. You have to be the bigger person almost to try to, create the space to have these conversations, right?
Yes.
So it's like, it's effort.
And even if that goes awry, right? And even if it's this explosive conversation, you're still saying what you need to say. And that's still like part of the journey. It doesn't have to look perfect. It doesn't have to follow that path. And the person's still hearing you, even if they're not having the reaction that like you hope that they're having. And even if they're not becoming as educated as quickly as you want them to, you're still starting that process and they're still hearing your words. And then it's their job to kind of like utilize that to push themselves forward.
And if that doesn't work out and if the person's like really adamant on their beliefs, then I guess another step is like we have to go to therapy ourselves to deal with that, right? So have you seen, I don't know if you've seen the meme. I saw this meme and it said, I'm going to therapy because I'm dealing with somebody who didn't.
Yes.
I don't know if you've heard that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that like, that's one of the trickiest pieces is trying to find that line between doing your due diligence, right? And doing your job as like a strong person that like has the capacity and the empowerment to educate people, and also knowing that you can't change everyone. And where is that line? And where do you kind of say, all right, like enough. And now time to kind of like seek other like-minded people.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. So I have in many times in the past hoped that somebody that I was dealing with would go to therapy themselves because it's really good for them, But again, like we come from a society where there's like the stigma around mental health. It's almost like something to be shameful of. So like when you're dealing with people who don't want to go to therapy or don't believe in therapy or like haven't been exposed to even the concept of therapy, how do you create an environment to have these conversations or even like introduce the concept of therapy to people who have never, thought about it?
So I would say that therapy is a tool, and therapy is a tool that I think every single person would probably be a better version of themselves if they went to therapy. So again, kind of normalizing that it's not just for like a sickness. It's not just if something's wrong with you. It's a tool for better understanding yourself and living a more fulfilling life. Also, therapy is completely confidential. So no one needs to know that you're going. This is something that you can pursue just for yourself, and you can try it out. There's also no harm in trying it out, right? And if it's not helpful for you, you don't have to go back to that person. You can try a different person. But it really is something that you can do just for you. And it's a doctor's appointment the same way that you'd go and make sure that your heart is healthy. It's a way of making sure that your brain is as healthy as it can be to live the best life that you can.
Wow.
Earlier, before we started recording, you had said mental health is just as important as physical health, right? Like it's like when you're sick, you go to the doctor because you need to get better. It's the same thing. Your mind controls a lot of things. In fact, it's more important.
Absolutely.
Sometimes.
I mean, obviously I'm in this field, but I really believe that mental health is possibly even more important than physical health. And also they're so intertwined, right? Our mental health can cause physical issues and vice versa. And I believe that if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling anxious, it really robs you of the ability to live as full of a life as you could. the same way that a heart problem would or a broken leg would, you know, and it's fixable. I think that's the other piece is that you don't have to feel like that. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, you know, if they're feeling anxious or they're feeling depressed or they're in that space, they don't have to feel like that. Like there is work that can be done, you know, even apart from medication, there's work that can be done behaviorally, there's work that can be done in therapy, there's work that someone can do on their own that can improve how they're feeling, and they're not stuck with that lot in life. It can be different, it can be better, and life doesn't have to feel that hard.
Oh God, like that you don't have to feel like that is such an important thing, because you've said that to me before. That's one of the reasons why you're here today, because that little thing has really helped me. When I was feeling down, you like reached out to me, you texted me making sure I was okay, and I remember clearly when you said you don't have to feel like that. That's what gave me like how you like encouraged me to be like, yeah, I don't really have to feel like this. You know, I'm in this state right now and I can get myself out of that. And I think that's so important because like a lot of times when you're in that little ditch, it almost feels like you're helpless. You don't know how to get out of there. And it feels like, oh my God, like this is how I'm feeling and I don't know how to get out of it. And just someone telling you, you don't have to feel like that. Like there's ways to work that through is just so encouraging to help your own self. So yeah, that brings me to this. Like, I've suggested therapy to people before in my family, I guess, or in you know, my circle. Or, but again, because we come from a place where if therapy isn't normalized, it might almost come off like an attack. Like, you need help. It might come off as that. So, what are some safe words or phrases that you recommend when you don't want someone to feel attacked or triggered or offended? When you want to start these conversations, like, do you have any words and phrases that you recommend people use so that people don't feel offended?
So I think I'll tell you. So I think the tricky thing about this is that you can't actually prevent someone from feeling offended. I think ideally what you want to do is educate someone that it's okay to feel kind of threatened by this. It's okay that this feels scary. That doesn't mean that it's bad. So you might say something like, this has been helpful for me in the past, and I'm wondering if this might be helpful for you. And, you know, there's no pressure. You can take some time to think about it. Try not to look for answers in the moment. Instead, give them the time and the space to think about these things on their own time.
Right. And the resources, I believe, right?
Exactly. So you might say, you know, if you're trying to get them to go to therapy, I think it's tricky, right? Because therapy is only useful when someone is all in, right? So therapy is what you make of it, right? And it's what you bring to the table. It's also the person that you choose to be your therapist, for sure. Like, that fit is incredibly important. But I think the biggest piece is how willing that person is to be there. So you can't force a person to go, and you can't force a person to be invested in it. But I think if someone is open to giving it a shot, I think that's wonderful. And you're trying to create that space for almost curiosity. So even if they're not going to go in excited and ready and all in, maybe they'll go in curious and know that, like, worst case scenario, they've wasted an hour of their time, and best case scenario, they've kind of like opened their lives up and opened their brain up to like another capacity.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not because we're coming from a Western culture or an Eastern culture. It's about human being and the mental health and how this study has been so accessible, right? So going back to that is, what type of therapies are there? Since there are different type of therapies, we talked about, you know, couple, we talked about, you know, just having a fulfilling and meaningful life. What would one differentiate and know which one would be good for them?
So first of all, there's a few different kinds of therapists. So this is kind of important to know as well. So there's psychologists, there's social workers, there's licensed mental health counselors, and all of those people do a similar job, right? Their job is to provide the talk therapy piece of this. So the actual kind of talk therapy. And then there's psychiatrists that provide medication. So that's kind of like a whole different can of worms. And the only difference between a psychologist and like a social worker or a licensed mental health counselor is that psychologists can provide testing. So you'd want to go to a psychologist if you wanted to get testing to kind of find out, do I have ADHD? Do I have something like that that would create the opportunity for like a medication that might help you in those kinds of ways. So, but they all can provide talk therapy, right? But none of them can provide medication. So a psychologist, a social worker, or a licensed mental health counselor are not prescribers of medication. So that's a different piece. And then within that umbrella, there's all kinds of different types of therapy. Most therapists kind of function under the belief that when someone comes to them, they'll kind of pick the best type of therapy for that person. So there's different kind of theories around therapy and different ways of looking at mental health, but most therapists are pretty flexible within that. Some practice very specific modalities, such as dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. There's also therapists that focus more on kind of like holistic wellness, you know, so meditation and yoga and those pieces. However, I think like every therapist kind of involves those things, whether or not they're practicing like as a holistic therapist. But I think that if there's something specific that you're going in for, like if you're saying to yourself, gosh, I've been really struggling with anxiety, or I've been really struggling with depression, cognitive behavioral therapy is sort of like the gold standard for those sorts of things. It's about looking at how your thoughts affect how you feel and then therefore affect your actions. And it's kind of been the gold standard for therapy for those specific kind of challenges. However, there's newer modalities as well. I would even just do a quick Google search to educate yourself about what's out there. But I think even more important than that is the fit of the actual person that you're going to see. So I think what's so scary, like therapists have a lot of power, right? And if you're going to someone to talk about your most intimate concerns, it's super scary. It's really, really vulnerable to go into that session. And I think it's one of the bravest things that people do is go and say like, I want to better myself in this way. Like, I believe that I can like live a better life and I can improve my mental health. And the person that you see really matters. And we all have our own kind of biases about what would be most helpful to us, whether it's seeing a man or a woman, seeing someone that's younger or older. The office matters to some people, you know, and the modality certainly matters as well. And a lot of times people will kind of publish the modalities that they work under on their profiles. But a lot of times what's even more important is meeting with someone for a first session and just kind of getting a feel for it. And it's never going to feel perfectly comfortable to talk to a stranger about your most intimate concerns the first time, but you should at least feel like there's the potential to feel comfortable with this person and that there is like a warmth and a collaboration there that is possible. And that will make it easier for you. I mean, that is the foundation that you're building your work on. So you want that comfort and that fit to be there. And no therapist is a good fit for everybody. You know, like there's many different kind of feelings. And I think it's the personality of the person as well that is so critical for how that work is done.
Right.
So in my case, and especially for a lot of immigrants or second generation or first generation Americans, right? Therapy, the concept of therapy is going to be very different, or even approaching therapy is going to be very different, right? Because if you're from here and you were born and raised in America and you're American and your parents were born and raised here, these ideas are not too foreign. But when it comes to people who have just immigrated, even that culture shock of coming to a different culture, speaking a different language, getting used to a different way of life is a lot. And sometimes even therapy could even help ease that, right? When that's one of the things that I didn't have at the time. And I really want people to understand that like at any moment, if there's anything that's bothering you or anything that's difficult, there's therapy for that, I'm sure. So when it comes to like immigrants, right? And if you're not American, are there therapies or therapists that specialize in that area to help people kind of ease into this lifestyle?
So my first thought is that every therapist should be ready to do that, right? And that
Perfect, yeah.
every therapist, that's a very, very common issue. Like that's incredibly common.
Right.
Like anyone who is immigrating is going to be struggling with that adjustment.
Yeah.
And that's not an issue with the person. That is just an issue with the situation, right? Like it is incredibly hard. So I believe that, like, again, fit is super important, but every therapist should be prepared to manage that. So I don't think you have to look at a specialty in that way. Like there are some people.
Because it's America.
Yes, exactly. Like they should be ready, right? And there's sort of specialties that you can check off, you know, when you're putting your profile out to insurance and things like that.
Oh, there's like a filter.
There's a filter. And I think what they call it is like cultural issues or something like that.
Gotcha.
So they might look at it as like a cultural issue or immigration issues or something like that. But again, every therapist should be, I believe, should be ready to tackle those issues because they're just human issues, right? Like they're human issues times a million of like, we're all trying to find like our space in the world and our people and find a place where we feel like comfortable and heard and understood. And it's, of course, incredibly natural for anyone immigrating to feel that that is like particularly challenging.
You know, a lot of times I feel like, and this is something I've heard a lot when I've had conversations about therapy in my community, is that, oh, but we are from a different country. Like, would this therapist understand where I'm coming from? Like, they are not going to know my struggles. And that's like one of the biggest things why people kind of don't go.
Thank you for saying that because that's super important. And that's such a good point that I wasn't thinking about before. First of all, one of the kind of characteristics about a therapist that I think everybody should be looking for is a therapist that doesn't think of themselves as the expert on you. So when you go in to therapy, you are the expert on you. And what you really want from a therapist is someone that is willing to learn about who you are in all of those different facets, right? Like whether you're an immigrant or you're gay or you come from a history of family trauma or whatever your history is, you want someone willing to kind of learn about what that means to you and then work from that perspective, right? So even if you have a difference that is not, you don't feel like it's typical, right? That's what therapy is, right? That's like the biggest thing about what therapy is it's the ability of a person to learn about who you are and then come at your work from that perspective in a collaborative way. So that person should be really open to learning from you and ideally like asking the right questions to kind of say, all right, does this work? How does this sound to you? And the therapist might say something like, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, you know, and like help me understand this better and those kinds of things. So what you're looking for in a therapist is really like a person open to learning and then collaborating with you on how to find that path forward together. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That makes so much sense.
Yes. So there are things that, you know, when, especially like I said, we're going back to the culture again, we do things, we tend to do things. And I have done that a lot myself as well. I know it's not right. I still do it because, you know, because it's respectable, because we respect our elders, we respect our, you know, family members. And I do it and I feel it's not right. I do vocalize them. I said, you know, I don't feel this is right. But there are some people out there who are not able to say it, have the courage to speak up. So my question is, you are a physical being that does not agree with this concept and you have to do it. What would you say or how would you say to deal with that feeling? And of course, like we'll have a conversation on the side, but at the moment when it's happening, how do you go about that?
So there's a word for that. There is a term for that feeling and it's called cognitive dissonance. When you're doing something that just doesn't feel good to you, but you just you're torn about it, right? And there's a term for that. And also, I think that part of the empowerment needed to speak out about these things and live your life in a different way is creating a group or a avenue of people that are like-minded in certain ways. So getting that space from your family, because I think it can be scary, it can be dangerous, both emotionally, hopefully not, but physically in some ways, to speak out about these things in a pretty aggressive way if you don't have the space, the physical space to do that. And I think part of what's needed to really stand up about these things is to have a group of people or even a person that is like-minded in that way that you can fall back on and fall to when you are standing up to these things that you don't believe in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that you're not the only one.
You're not the only one, and that they don't have all of the power over your life. Because I think what's so tricky is like in these power dynamics where, you know, if you're a child and you have oppressive parents, you know, they hold the whole power over your life, right? And you're not empowered in any way to kind of like stand up to that, because they can really affect you. And I think the sweet spot of that change is when you are an adult and you can create a separate life and create a separate group of people that is like-minded, and you can still have your family and still be close with them, but you have the ability to really speak out because your whole life is not riding on that. You have other spaces for support and personhood that are not your family.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
It does. It does. And I will take a little bit extreme. Okay. Like you said, there is oppressive parents, or you may not, because you've been living in such a very close-knit community. You do not have an avenue to even have that type of community or even have that type of friends, right? But you've been just doing it because you think it is, you know,
the
normal,
right thing to do.
like the right thing to do, right? And so what do you say to that one person? What if the community is not there? How do you build that?
Right.
I think there's a piece of that could be possible through other mediums, you know, like educating yourself through, you know, reading things online, podcasts like this one, finding like-minded individuals that you might be finding through social media, to kind of start gaining that. It's almost like learning a new language, right? Like gaining that perspective for yourself and learning that like you're not the only person that feels like this. And then if you feel safe, you can then start trying to have those conversations with people within your physical community.
Yes. And I think with the power of technology and the power of like social media platforms, now you have so much places of research and community that you can go. So thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up, Saika, because that's so true. You know, we come from a place where we can't even find the community to have these conversations about mental health and therapy, or like find like the community to encourage you to like speak out when you feel like something's not right. But we live in a global world now. Like you can make a community online with people that don't live in the same area as you. You can find resources online, like such as podcasts like these, or like you said, Emily, thank you for that, or YouTube, or even Clubhouse. Like there's so many places to get resources, to get support. And
absolutely. And if it feels too scary to engage in the conversations, you can just listen at first, which I think is such a great place to start. You can just listen to other people that do have that space and do have that community already, and start to gain the courage needed to sort of start that process for yourself.
Because the thing is, the main thing is, it's so foreign to others, you can start normalizing it because you've done your research.
You could be the one to bring this in to your communities.
Exactly.
And this is where I want to be like, hey, you guys, if you're listening to this and you like it, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that bell so that you could get notified when we have new content. This conversation we're having today is very important. And if you feel like this is something you want other people to hear, if you want to be the person to bring these concepts to your community, share this with your friends and family so that they understand that these conversations are okay to have, and mental health and therapy is very normal, and it's okay to reach out. So quickly, I just want to talk about this thing because this really leads us to this next question, is that if you're coming from a place, like I said, like therapy is not as accessible as it is here, do you recommend anything people can do for themselves to better their mental health? Anything that they can do to help themselves in a place where they don't have access to therapy and stuff?
Absolutely. So there's been a ton of research done on things that you can just do on your own time just to help your mental health. And a lot of it is physical stuff, right? So there's a concept, I don't know if either of you have ever heard of, like sleep hygiene. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before, but it's basically sleep is kind of the cornerstone of mental health. Like if we're not sleeping well, it just affects every facet of our lives. So there's things that you can do to improve your sleep, like going to bed at the same time, getting up at the same time every day as much as possible. Obviously, that's impossible every day, but setting kind of a realistic goal for yourself in that way is a lot of research around like blue light and like making sure you're turning off screens about an hour before you get in bed, having like a relaxation process that you do before sleep, and prioritizing that sleep for yourself. There's also a lot of research on food, which is definitely not my specialty because I love ice cream and cookies, and I would never say to be like an expert on those things, but there's a huge amount of research on microbiome and your gut health and how that affects your mental health. And there's a ton of connection on how that affects anxiety and depression, particularly. So improving your diet is a huge part of mental health. Also, yoga is... I mean, a lot of research has come out on yoga that when this research came out, I was like, gosh, they're going to put me out of a job. Like it is like yoga has really been proven to be incredibly helpful for anxiety related challenges. And particularly about 20 minutes a day, 3 to 5 days a week, and making that part of like your practice. And that's connected to your nervous system, right? So learning to breathe in these certain ways that really connect to your body. Because how your body feels really affects how your mind feels and vice versa. So it's kind of interrupting that pathway in a positive way. Meditation has also been proven to be very, very useful as well, especially with anxiety related challenges. So those are all things that you can do on your own that can improve how you feel. And I think when we say mental health, we all have this kind of like, oh, that must mean there's a problem, but we all have mental health. I think of mental health as like emotional well-being, right? And we all have that, and we all have the ability to make that better. And it's not a diagnosis. It's instead like a way that we approach our day to day in a way that can improve how we feel.
That's a really good point because, you know, when we say mental health, it sounds like there's something wrong with you. Yeah. But you have a body and you got to take care of it. And you have mind and you got to take care of it.
You know, when we talk about physical health, it's so normal to say like, you know, oh, my physical health
is
so
good. I'm tired.
I'm tired.
My body's aching. Yeah.
But I mean, till today, we still have the mental health. The word mental health is still like, ooh. Even here,
Absolutely.
You know, I feel like sometimes when you, right? I feel.
Yeah. It like changes when you start talking about mental health, it changes the air.
Yes.
Right?
It does.
Yeah. Physical health is so talked about and it's so normalized, but mental health isn't. You know, I've always thought like to be my perfect version of self, to be good, I need to have mental and physical balance. Like I need to be balanced in all ways. Yeah. And this emphasis we have in our society of being physically fit, you know, like fitness and all of that is great. It's not a bad thing at all, but mental health is just as equally as important.
Yep.
So after this conversation, it sounds like it all comes down to self-care, right?
Absolutely. Self-care is actually one of the first questions I ask my clients when they come in. So I first ask them like if they've been to therapy before and what was helpful and what wasn't helpful. And then I ask them what they're doing on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis to take care of themselves.
Wow.
You know, and even like very recently, self-care was looked at as something that only people that were dealing with like very severe mental health things needed to do. And now it's like, now we know it's like we all need self-care. And
absolutely.
Even here in America, like working with people that are very open to therapy, still when I ask people about self-care, everybody's like, I do nothing. I do absolutely nothing, you know? And so that's a lot of times like where we start is kind of figuring out what a reasonable goal is for self-care. So this may not look like going to the gym twice a week for an hour. This may look instead like having a cup of coffee for 3 minutes every morning, you know? We're setting like a reasonable goal, these tiny things that you can do every day, every week, every month to take care of you and show up as the best version of yourself. And that looks different for everybody.
What is your self-care routine? What does your self-care look like? What do you do?
So mine is getting outside every day. And also I set aside 30 minutes most days to do some kind of movement. So that might be walking. If I'm very energized, it might be like a HIIT routine. It's sometimes Pilates, sometimes running. And I'm doing that more just to kind of for my own mental health because it makes me feel, I start my day like that and it makes me feel like I've accomplished something before I've even showered. You know what I mean? It kind of like starts me out in that space. And that doesn't work for everybody. I don't think that's the best thing for everybody by a long shot, but that's what works the best for me. I have a best friend that's a therapist and she hates working out, you know, and instead she has tea every morning for 30 minutes and she reads a magazine and that's like how she starts her day. And that sets her up to have a great day. And neither is better or worse. Like this is just, you find what works the best for you. And a lot of times with someone who isn't familiar with taking care of themselves that way, I say like, let's try a couple things. Like let's brainstorm a list of things that you might be open to trying. And then let's give them a shot and see what you want to keep and what you want to discard.
Wow. That's such great information because self-care looks different for everyone. We get so influenced by what we see on social media that we feel like, oh, I have to do this and I have to do that. But you could create your own self-care routine that works for you.
Wow. Thank you.
Wow. Like, so that brings us to the end of this. We're so glad to have you, Emily. Like, I wish I could talk to you all day, every day, but unfortunately, this is the end of our time here. Thank you so much for joining us here at Himalayan Hipsters.
Thank you so much, Emily. It was a pleasure. You have taught us so many things today. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. It's such an honor to be with you. So thank you both.
You have just listened to episode 4. Please don't forget to check out our first 3 episodes so that you get a better idea of what we are doing here at Himalayan Hipsters. We have so many more amazing things and amazing content to bring to you. And we really would love if you could support us by hitting that like button, share, follow us, subscribe, and hit the little bell so you get notified when we have new content. At this time, we have our podcast on all podcast streaming platforms, and you can also find us here on YouTube. Don't forget to share this with your family, and we can't wait to bring you new amazing conversations every week on Sundays.
Every week on Sundays. Your feedback and suggestion means so much to us. Please leave a comment below and let us know how we are doing. Thank you so much.
We are Himalayan Hipsters.